Read the passage, then answer the questions. From 5 Weeks in a Balloon by Jules Verne. Dr. Ferguson had a friend, not another self indeed, an alter ego, for friendship could not exist between two beings exactly alike. But if they possessed different qualities, aptitudes, and temperaments, Richard Kennedy and Samuel Ferguson lived with one and the same heart, and that gave them no great trouble. In fact, quite the reverse. The acquaintanceship of these two friends had been formed in India, when they belonged to the same regiment. While Richard would be out in pursuit of the tiger and the elephant, Samuel would be in search of plants and insects. Each could call himself expert in his own province, and more than one rare botanical specimen, that to science was as great a victory won as the conquest of a pair of ivory tusks, became the doctor's booty. Since their return to England, they had frequently separated by the doctor's distant expeditions. But on his return, the latter never failed to go, not to ask for hospitality, but to bestow some weeks of his presence at the home of his crony Richard. The Scot talked of the past, the doctor busily prepared for the future. The one looked back, the other forward, hence a restless spirit personified in Ferguson, perfect calmness typified in Kennedy. Such was the contrast. After his journey to the Thibet, the doctor had remained nearly 2 years without hinting at new explorations, and Richard, supposing that his friend's instinct for travel and thirst for adventure had at length died out, was perfectly enchanted. They would have ended badly some day or another, he thought to himself, no matter what experience one has with men. One does not travel with impunity among cannibals and wild beasts. So Kennedy besought the doctor to tie up his bark for life, having done enough for science and too much for the gratitude of men. The doctor contented himself with making no reply to this. He remained absorbed in his own reflections, giving himself up to secret calculations, passing his nights among heaps of figures, and making experiments with the strangest-looking machinery, inexplicable to everybody but himself. It could readily be guessed, though, that some great thought was fermenting in his brain. Botanical, relating to plants, with impunity, without punishment, fermenting, brewing, stirring around. What can he have been planning, wondered Kennedy, when in the months of January his friend quitted him to return to London. He found out one morning when he looked into the Daily Telegraph. Merciful heaven, he explained, the lunatic, the madman, across Africa in a balloon. Nothing but that was wanted to cap the climax. That's what he's been bothering his wits about these past 2 years. On that very evening, Kennedy, half alarmed and half exasperated, took the train for London, where he arrived next morning. 3/4 of an hour later, a cab deposited him at the door of the doctor's modest dwelling in Soho Square, Greek Street. Forthwith, he bounded up the steps and announced his arrival with 5 good, hearty-sounding raps at the door. Ferguson opened in person. "Richard, you here?" he exclaimed, but with no great expression of surprise, after all. "Richard himself," was the response. "And what have you come to town for?" "To prevent the greatest piece of folly that was ever conceived." "Folly?" said the doctor. "Is what this paper says the truth?" rejoined Kennedy, holding out the copy of the Daily Telegraph mentioned above. "Ah, that's what you mean, is it? These newspapers are great tattlers. But sit down, my dear Richard." "No, I won't sit down. Then you really intend to attempt this journey?" "Most certainly. All my preparations are getting along finely. And where are your traps? Let me have a chance at them. I'll make them fly. I'll put your preparations in fine order." And saying so, the gallant Scot gave way to a genuine explosion of wrath. "Come, be calm, my dear Richard," resumed the doctor. "You're angry at me because I did not acquaint you with my new project?" He calls this his new project. "I have been very busy," the doctor went on, without heeding the interruption. "I have had so much to look after. But rest assured that I should not have started without writing to you. Oh, indeed, I'm highly honored, because it is my intention to take you with me." Upon this, the Scotchman gave a leap that a wild goat would not have ashamed of among his native crags. "Ah, really, then, you want them to send us both to Bedlam?" "I have counted positively upon you, my dear Richard, and I have picked you out from all the rest." Kennedy stood speechless with amazement. But he made up his mind to oppose his friend's departure by all means in his power, and so pretended to give in, at the same time keeping on the watch. As for the doctor, he went on diligently with his preparations. Number 1. Read the dialogue in paragraphs 21 through 27 of the passage. What does this dialogue reveal about Richard Kennedy? A. He is hurt because the doctor didn't tell him about the plans. B. He is outraged because he considers the trip to be dangerous. C. He is impatient to get started on the journey. D. He is pleased that he will be included on the trip. Number 2. Which statement from the passage helps explain why Richard Kennedy is shocked when he reads the newspaper article about Samuel Ferguson's plan? A. While Richard would be out in pursuit of the tiger and the elephant, Samuel would be in search of plants and insects. B. The Scot talked of the past, the doctor busily prepared for the future. C. The doctor had remained nearly 2 years without hinting at new explorations. D. In the month of January, his friends quitted him to return to London. Number 3. The author develops the theme of the passage mostly by describing A. The relationship between Kennedy and Ferguson. B. The journeys that Kennedy and Ferguson have taken. C. The reason that Ferguson has not told Kennedy about his travel plans. D. The reaction Kennedy has to learning about Ferguson's travel plans. Number 4. Which of the following is the best summary of the excerpt? A. Richard Kennedy and Samuel Ferguson have long been friends. Kennedy thinks his friend has finally given up on his life of adventure, but then he is shocked to discover that his friend plans to cross Africa in a balloon. Kennedy confronts Ferguson, who reveals his plans to take Kennedy along on the journey. B. Richard Kennedy and Samuel Ferguson meet in India when both are serving in the same military regiment. While Kennedy is a great hunter, Ferguson is a scientist who takes pleasure in his study of plants. Ferguson uses his scientific knowledge to do experiments and plan a trip across Africa in a balloon. C. Richard Kennedy and Samuel Ferguson have different qualities and personalities, but they are great friends regardless. While Kennedy talks of the past, Ferguson is restless and always looking to the future. Their friendship is tested when Kennedy learns that Ferguson has secretly been planning a trip across Africa in a balloon. D. When Richard Kennedy reads in the newspaper that his old friend Samuel Ferguson plans to cross Africa in a balloon, he is shocked. Exasperated, Kennedy rushes to London to discuss the situation with Ferguson. Ferguson assures Kennedy that he was going to tell him of the plan, and Kennedy's mind is put at ease.